What's up, guys? It's Joey, and we're back for week 15. 15. Oh my gosh, week 5. I think the season's going along faster than I thought it was.
Where are you?
I don't know where I am right now. But Luke is not here this week. That's fine because me and Ian are going to be running the ship this week. You can follow Ian on Twitter at IanGridley_FFA. He's posting a lot of good stuff on there, and he's been hitting on a lot of his takes over these last few weeks. If you minus the Deontay Johnson one, which I'm still counting because immediately after he turned it up with Andy.
Never wrong, just early.
Never wrong, I'm going to start using that on all my start sit posts. So yeah, we're going to get straight into it. Before we do, reminder, you guys can go to Underdog, use code ANALYST. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100. We continue to put our picks up every Thursday. You can take advantage of a lot of the different game modes they have, so definitely worth checking that out. So, last night, TNF recap with Atlanta versus Tampa Bay. I just want to start off by saying I started both kickers in like across all my leagues. Either had Chase McLaughlin or Younghoe Koo started in about every single league, so I'm very happy with those choices. But Kirk Cousins throwing for over 500 yards, Darnell Mooney and Drake London both gave you a huge jump start to your week. Kyle Pitts even got involved. Kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But with all that yardage, all those points, Bijan Robinson still I made a trade for Bijan Robinson. But yeah, no, it's just he's just not putting it together. He just doesn't look all that efficient. They're not giving him the touches that he should be getting. Tyler Algier is getting way too involved for my liking. What's your takeaway from the Atlanta side of the situation?
From the Atlanta side, like I think it was more game plan. I don't think Bijan doesn't look like bursty or explosive. I think he's still the talent that we know he is. It's not like a personal thing, I guess.
True.
Like I have issues with like DeAndre Swift. Like he just doesn't know how to run the football. Like he goes east to west a lot instead of north and south. Like I don't see that problem with Bijan. I don't see them like giving Algier touches because he's not playing well. I think they give Algier touches because Algier's good. And that's just super unfortunate for fantasy owners. But Algier's a good player too. My big takeaway there is that if the passing game is working and they exploit something in a matchup, they're going to take it. I think there will be big weeks for Bijan, but they like him in pass pro. And he might not run as many routes as we thought he would because they like him picking up blitzes. And I think, unfortunately, when you're taking a lot of big hits, picking up the blitz, they're going to spell you a lot with a backup. But last week, it was also a passing game. It was a passing game script. Again, I think it was a matchup thing. Super excited about some of those guys. The Darnell Mooney truthers from a couple years ago can rise up now. This was the elite separation that everyone was talking about. You see it now.
Yeah.
I think it's overall encouraging. It's just I think it's a little bit unfortunate for Bijan Robinson owners.
You know what's funny too is you literally could have started any Atlanta pass catcher this week.
Yeah.
Drake London, 12 for 154 and a touchdown. Huge. Darnell Mooney, 9 for 105 and 2 touchdowns. Huge. Kyle Pitts, 7 for 88. As far as tight ends go, he's probably the tight end one this week.
Yeah.
Ray McLeod, 6 for 66. Kadarrell Hodge at the last second, 2 for 67 and a touchdown. Like any of the pass catchers for the Falcons you could have started this week, and they would have been great. Bijan Robinson, 12 for 61. Efficient, 3 catches for 16 yards. He just didn't get the opportunity, but I think the opportunity will come. And as Kirk Cousins gets more use to this offense, he kind of learns, as he did today, I think, or yesterday, he learned to throw pretty well with putting the pressure on that back foot ever since coming off from that Achilles injury. So things should improve for Bijan, theoretically. Looking at the Tampa Bay side, Baker Mayfield continues to be efficient, 3 touchdowns in this game. The big story here really was the running backs. So the Bucky Irving train has kind of a temporary stop. I wouldn't call it a hard stop, but a bad fumble. Rachaad White ripped off a big run. it's just I think Bucky Irving is still that guy. And you saw at the end of the game too, after he fumbled, they still did go back to him. But this is still a split backfield, and Rashad White, as of now, is still leading this backfield. Mike Evans, 2 touchdowns in this game. Any certain takeaways from this backfield? Are you trying to sell Rashad White after this game and buy Bucky Irving, or are you still kind of split in terms of who you want to target from this backfield?
I like selling Rashad White. I'd be trying to buy Bucky Irving low. Like it's concerning for Bucky Irving owners, and there might be people that aren't as like sold. And I understand that like maybe Bucky Irving isn't like a generational talent, and he didn't like go super high in the draft. They didn't invest too much draft capital into him, so I can understand why you think they wouldn't want to go to that. But the point is, they still invested in a guy. And he's still stealing snap shares away from a guy in Rashad White who's been on this team for a few years, and they've never really fully committed to giving the backfield to. Rashad White, outside of that run, was still inefficient. He's a good pass catcher. He's like a fine player, but he is not a very efficient fantasy back. He's not a very bursty player. He's more touchdown dependent, more volume dependent.
Yeah.
Bucky Irving has that big play capability. Disappointing to see the fumble because I think a lot of things were going right in that direction, but this might be the best Rashad White performance we're going to see in a while. And Atlanta's defense is really bad, personnel wise. They're really, really bad. If you have Rashad White, this might be your last chance to sell him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, Bucky Irving, as you mentioned too, he could slowly take over this backfield. So he's already started doing it each week. His snaps have gone up. The splits have been pretty even, and he's the more efficient back. So we'll see how that goes. So that's the Thursday night recap. Again, big news from the Atlanta side. Baker Mayfield is still a top quarterback. So we'll see how the rest of that shakes out. Before we go into our next segment, I just want to shout out Fantasy Fits. Send me some t-shirts. This is a Gen Z shirt. I think, there you go. I really like the design of it. They have a lot of other cool designs. I'll leave that link down below. Good friend of the show. Met him at the expo. So just wanted to touch on that real quick before we moved on to a segment Ian has requested. And I'm sure a lot of others want to know, what the hell do we do with Mark Andrews? I mean, again, this guy's just not getting involved in the offense. I have Isaiah Likely in a lot of leagues, and by the way, technically he's still a top 5 tight end.
Technically,
after that first week, technically speaking, tight end 5 Isaiah.
Keyword there.
Technically, is the
keyword. That is a diss to every other tight end in the league, and not a credit to Isaiah Likely.
But at the end of the day, this is just, to me, it seems like an offense that purely it kind of reminds me of the Titans, where if they can just give Derrick Henry the ball 30 times and end the game like that, that's what they'll do. But Ian, I want to hear your thoughts. This was requested by you.
Yeah, so that offense does seem to be very much centered around run after the catch. They're not throwing vertically a ton. And when they are, it's not really going to your Mark Andrews and your Isaiah Likely's, which is kind of crazy considering the whole, and I'm going to say it again, the too high safety thing that keeps coming up. The way to attack that is to throw in the seams. You'd think you'd be getting Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely seam route balls left and right. We're not. We're actually seeing kind of a revelation of Rashad Bateman is kind of more involved than we ever thought he would. Even Zay Flowers isn't running a ton of downfield stuff. They try to get him the ball in space. Yeah, it's completely predicated around athletes in space. That is their offense in a nutshell. Mark Andrews, great athlete, not necessarily the guy you want in space. And their offensive line has been bad, and he's been in blocking a lot. And clearly they have another tight end that they want to, keep running out there. They want to keep defenses off guard. And if they have to keep one in to block, it's going to be Andrews over Likely at this point. Andrews still has some name value, and there's still some people that are going to believe that he can break out. In every league that I have Mark Andrews, I am selling. I don't think he is a top 10 fantasy tight end anymore. And this is like projecting for like, we got rest of season projections. This is like ROC, rest of career. Like, unless he goes somewhere else, if he's in Baltimore, I just don't see it.
So the thing you said about blocking made me think of, and that's why I'm trying to do research here real quick so I can pull it up. It made me think of the Dalton Schultz situation from last year. So in weeks 1 through 3 last year, Dalton Schultz had 2.4 points, 7.4 points, and 1.9 points. And people thought this new signing in Houston was cooked. But in reality, their starting left tackle was out for those first 3 or 4 games. So Dalton Schultz went from being a primary pass catcher on this team to being basically a sixth lineman and blocking on just about every single play. Now, once their left tackle, which I believe is Laramie Tunsil, Laramie Tunsil, if I am not mistaken, once he came back, 13 points, 19 points, 16 points, 27 points, 11, 11, 14. Like, he became much more involved in the offense because he actually had the opportunity to open things up. So for this Ravens team, which again, they're not waiting for a guy to come back. This is what they have. But this is just a situation where unfortunately Mark Andrews is going to be primarily a blocker. And when your offense relies so much on the run with Derrick Henry and even Lamar, like, you kind of have to have that figured out. So I unfortunately do not think this is going to change for Mark Andrews. He seems to be kind of perpetually stuck in this blocking type role. Isaiah Likely is pretty good at blocking too. But as you mentioned, if you want a guy in space and you're picking between Likely and Mark Andrews, you're going to go with Likely. So those are the big differences between last year and this year with this offense. And that hurts Mark Andrews. But yeah, I just thought about that.
No, and I think that's a good comparison. I think what's really concerning here is that Ronnie Stanley cannot block speed rushers. He can't. Like, he needs chip help. So even if Andrews is going to run a route, he's going to be in, giving somebody a little chip and then running out. It means he's going to get like a lower average depth of target because you're not going to have a guy chip and then run a 20-yard route. Like, you're probably going to chip and then just turn around and be a safety blanket for the tight end or for the quarterback. And at the same time, like, this offense, again, predicated in athletes in space, and who gets the ball every play is Lamar Jackson. Like, what's better than a 5-yard dump down to Mark Andrews? Having him just stay in and block, and then lead block from Lamar Jackson, who may end up running for 20 yards and probably be more efficient at it than trying to throw the ball downfield to an aging tight end, coming off a lot of injuries.
Yeah, and even the thing you said too about the safety blanket, their safety blanket has been Justice Hill. When they want to throw the ball, they don't wait for guys to get open downfield. Lamar sits in the pocket. You have Justice Hill out, like I've seen a lot on the left, and like a screen just kind of waiting. And then Lamar just looks over, dumps it down, and he does what he does after the catch. So when they're looking to pass and they don't have that downfield shot, he'll look immediately to his left. And that's just kind of how it goes. So
yeah, this whole Ravens offense is tempo and space. You get Derrick Henry, and then you get to change of pace with Justice Hill, and then you start dinking and dunking underneath. And then I've seen Justice Hill run some like 40-yard wheel routes, like some deep shots from the backfield. They're not afraid to get their athletes in space, but it's very clear that they don't prioritize getting tight ends the ball anymore. It's a different offense, and that's maybe the biggest change we're seeing from the Greg Roman era, is that we are not trying to create easy dump down looks for Lamar. We're just trying to get the ball to our guys in space and let them cook.
Yeah, and if I were to provide a little glimmer of hope, it would be that their rookie right tackle, I believe, just started his first game last week. He's kind of shaky, but if he comes in and he can perform to how he wants, that kind of helps a piece of that line. And again, like it's a little glimmer of hope, but if he can come in and provide the protection needed, it might loosen up Andrews or Isaiah Likely to more targets. But again, this offense is predicated around getting people into space, tempo. It's just not going to work out. So if you have Mark Andrews, might be time
selling.
to.
I traded him.
What is the question?
Yeah, I traded him for Quentin Johnson in a redraft league. My buddy who specifically requested this has him in Dynasty. In Dynasty, I honestly think a dart throw. Like, Truly. So Ryan, if you're listening, just anything. Like
What would you take if you had Mark Andrews? Would you sell Andrews for a third round pick for like a rookie third?
I'd be really happy with a third round pick. Like, I'm being so honest. I spent
Oh,
about an hour on the phone talking about this with my friend, and I was like, if I have any young player that's like has any part of an offense, I'm probably prioritizing that over Mark Andrews.
yeah.
I was like, look, there are guys that maybe had some hype preseason that have died down, like a post hype sleeper. That's, I think, kind of the area you're in.
Yeah.
I like Kamani Vidal is a name that comes to mind, or you like might want to invest.
Nice.
Like that's genuinely where I'm at. Like I said, in a redraft league, I was able to get him for Quentin Johnson, probably not in Dynasty, just because of the age. But at this point, you got to sell him for a guy whose name doesn't have a lot of value, or just somebody's bench stash, and they're like, yeah, sure, I'll take a flyer on Mark Andrews just as much as you're taking a flyer on anyone not named Mark Andrews. That's sort of where we're at.
Maybe even if you could try to get someone like Blake Corum, who has not been involved at all, and you just never know what these running backs are going to look like in 2 to 3 years. Anything is possible. But okay, awesome. So we're going to move on to some of our picks now. I'll start us off with this one player who you also did a little bit of research on, and I was like, no, that's mine. So I stole him
We
from
agree
you.
here.
We agree here. Dontavian Wicks. Dontavian Wicks goes into this game in a really, really good position. Romeo Doubs personally, Romeo Doubs is dealing with a personal issue. There's a chance he may not even play in this game. Christian Watson also is out for this matchup as well. And what's really important about this is when Dontavian Wicks plays at least 70% of the offensive snaps, he gets 21.5 points per game. And that's over a 2-year course. 24 points, 15 points, 24 points, averages out to about 21.5 points. So Dontavian Wicks in a starting role is good. Okay, at the end of the day, he's being targeted at a 31% rate through his routes. That's the 5th best in the league. And the Rams are allowing the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So if you have Dontavian Wicks, this is a smash start week. I'm plugging him into every lineup that I was able to get him in this week. Or if you had him stashed since week 1, now is the time to let it rip. And if he does well, he could stick to this starting role. It seems like right now he's been splitting with Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson. As we know, Jaden Reed is just going to stay on the field. But if he can earn that complete full starting role, Dontavian Wicks is going to be a problem. So, big fan of Dontavian Wicks this week.
Completely agree. I think this might be the week where he takes that job and runs with it, where we finally get to stop having the 4 alphas conversation and start just going into like Dontavian Wicks is the X and then Jaden Reed is the gadget. And then everyone else is just there.
Yeah, and on top of that too, what do we think the ceiling for Dontavian Wicks is if he earns that kind of role? Is he the bona fide wide receiver 1 for this offense, to where you look at the Packers and you go, as you mentioned, like a 2-part where you have Jaden Reed and then you have Wicks as like the legit wide receiver 1 of this team? Or do you see him as more of a, even at his best, he's rotational player with Watson and some of these other guys?
I see it genuinely as like I think the 49ers are a really good comp here, actually. Jaden Reed being the Deebo Samuel. He's going to run a lot of underneath stuff. I mean, he will run some deep routes, don't get me wrong, but he's going to be running in motion a lot, running a lot of deep stuff, getting handoffs. He's going to be a lot of the eye candy, and they're going to try to get him in space. And Dontavian Wicks is going to be that guy who you're asking to occasionally win his one-on-ones on the outside, and then he's going to be running your like deep breaking ins, your curl routes. Like he's going to be running your zone beaters as well. And then I would see Doubs as more of like the Y, the non-primary outside receiver, and Watson is more of like the field stretcher. And I think that's how that eventually shakes out. But even like the metrics would have said, like last year, Dontavian Wicks won versus man coverage, I think 70% of the time. He had the best separation statistics on the team, which is a big thing that I look at. Like he's getting open. And then this year, we're even seeing when he's on the field, he gets targeted a lot by Jordan Love. I'm really hoping he wins this role.
He better if they're smart.
Yeah.
So that's just how things will work out. But who's your first player?
So my start of the week here, and I feel like this is a trend for me now. I keep saying big names that haven't played well. This is the Garrett Wilson week. Minnesota is the most thrown against team in the NFL outside of the Falcons from last night. So from any team that's played 3 games, they're the most thrown against team. In real life statistics, they're actually pretty good against the pass. They're like 62% completion percentage, and they have 8 interceptions, leading to like the 3rd lowest, I believe, quarterback rating. But in fantasy, that doesn't matter. In fantasy, they're getting the ball thrown against them a lot, meaning that teams want to exploit the pass. Teams are losing against them, and they need to throw the ball. And the Jets are coming off a bad week where Aaron Rodgers is going to want to put up some numbers and try to get things right. And to this point, they haven't really gotten on the same page, Rodgers and Wilson. Wilson had some quotes about how teams been switching it up, and the Jets don't really do that. I think this is the week where Rodgers starts leaning on his one. And we know that Rodgers is a guy that will lean on his number 1 receiver when he gets the chance. I like the matchup from a potential game script standpoint. And I also like the fact that they don't have a cornerback 1. They don't have a lockdown corner. So they're going to have to double him if they want to stop him. So I think this is the week where Garrett Wilson finally breaks out and that Jets offense gets something going.
And then they trade for Devontae Adams next week.
Exactly. And then I'm actually wrong and I was early.
Wrong and early.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I like it too. I think, again, like a lot of this offense has moved through the running backs, whether it's Breece Hall or even Braylon Allen running it, or just, dump off passes, or even Allen Lazard, especially in the red zone. Allen Lazard has gotten his fair share, but Garrett Wilson should be the focal point of this offense. He's getting the targets. It's just, again, it's just not connecting. And last week, take it with a grain of salt as well, because he was going up against Pat Surtain, which has been the best corner in football. So definitely not easy. But my next player here is Amari Cooper. So Amari Cooper, through 4 weeks, he's got 25.8% target share, which is, relatively good. We have some players with 30 or 40 on a week-to-week basis, but Amari Cooper sitting at 25, we like that. Going against the Washington Commanders, who are the worst defense against wide receivers this year. And what's really interesting about this team, too, is I think Washington has scored on every single drive, or they have a good streak going where they've just been scoring on every single drive this season. So they're either getting a field goal or a touchdown every time they touch the ball, which leaves opposing teams to kind of have to follow that. It leads to a lot of shootouts, essentially. So you have a guy with a high target share going against a defense that sucks defending against wide receivers, and it's going to be a shootout. I think this is where Amari Cooper kind of steps in and has another one of those vintage big games. Also, according to a friend of the show, Fantasy Guides, Amari Cooper was 2 plays away from being a top 10 wide receiver right now as it stands. One where a ball fell off his fingertips, and another that was a long touchdown callback from penalties. So if those 2 plays happen, Amari Cooper right now is a top 10 wide receiver, and I don't even have to tell you guys to start him. So Amari Cooper is someone I'm definitely firing up this week. He has been involved in some trade rumors, so we'll see how that kind of shakes out. We still don't know the full extent of Rashee Rice's injury and whether the Chiefs are even interested in trading for an outside wide receiver. They seem like the kind of team that would just kind of go with what they have or sign a veteran that's like not on any team right now. But something to keep in mind for this week, Amari Cooper should be a full go. What are your thoughts, Amari Cooper? Pro, anti?
I'm pro Amari Cooper, and I think like in the projection of his career, we are seeing some fall off, but I do think a lot of that is related to Deshaun Watson and not really his own personal ability. I did see some troubling separation statistics early in the season, but that doesn't seem to be affecting production. He's been getting 8+ targets a week, every single week. And on the weeks where those end up in his hands, he produces well. So I think Amari Cooper, because there's going to be tons of guys where it could have been the top 10 if this had happened or if that had happened. That always kind of can be the case. But I think that just goes to the point that he is getting opportunity, and in fantasy, opportunity is everything. So Amari Cooper is not sliding out of this top 25, 1,000-yard a season guy. It's what I said a few weeks ago. He's as solid as anybody in the league. You could do a lot worse than Amari Cooper.
Yeah, absolutely. Who is your next player?
All right, so I'm finally going to do a -1. I'm breaking some trends here. Sit Tyreek Hill in almost every league, unless you have 3 wide receivers or 2 flexes or some kind of combination of the both. In standard leagues, even in 10-team leagues, I am benching Tyreek Hill. He is a flex option at best, and a lot of that comes down to the offense. It's not really like a concern with Tyreek or his performance, but they cannot run routes longer than 10 yards. It doesn't seem like Tyler Huntley or anyone on that team is capable of processing how much you need to be in control of in that offense. And maybe that's where Tua is a little bit underrated, actually, is that he's able to understand the scheme that McDaniels is trying to put out there. Maybe this isn't an offense where everybody can just step in and run it. Because Tyreek Hill has looked like a slot receiver the last couple of weeks. He's looked like a guy that you just throw it down to get to the next down. It doesn't seem like they're designing plays as much as they're just happy the quarterback doesn't take a sack. And then this week, even if they do get it going, they have the Patriots and Christian Gonzalez, who's turning into one of the best man-to-man corners in the league. So even if they do figure it out, I'd say you still be downgrading him because he's not going to see the same amount of targets. I wouldn't be targeting Christian Gonzalez if I were Tyler Huntley. So yeah, I have him outside of the top 25. I've seen on Fantasy Pros, if you go in there and organize it by the most accurate wide receiver rankers, most of them have him outside of the top 25 as well. So I don't think I'm far away from consensus in saying, unless if you're struggling at receiver, you're benching Tyreek Hill this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for sure. And I think last year there's even Christian Gonzalez got to play against Tyreek Hill before he tore his ACL, and he locked him down. I remember seeing the statistics where he really didn't allow Tyreek Hill to do much. He was able to keep up with him, which is really the biggest thing. So, yeah, I agree. I'm unfortunately having to start Tyreek Hill in 2 of my leagues this week. Not super happy about it. One of the choices I have, which leads me to my last player here, is Tyreek Hill or Jackson Smith-Njigba, which is like, but now here's my hesitation. Here's my hesitation with Jackson Smith-Njigba, which leads me to the last point. The Giants are allowing the 12th least points to wide receiver, which, take that with a grain of salt. It's about who they've played. They're getting run on, that at the end of the day doesn't really have too much weight. But we've seen when Seattle has like blowout games like they did against Miami and even against Denver week 1, where they were ahead for a good portion of that game. And then Denver kind of had a little bit of a chance to come back at the end. They just didn't have the need. Like Geno didn't have to throw the ball 50 times like he did against the Lions. Right. And he didn't have to do that like he did against the Patriots, where the Patriots actually kept it close and sent it to overtime. When it's a blowout game, Jackson Smith-Njigba gets like 2 or 3 targets. And unfortunately, I think that is going to be the game here that's going to be the case here against the Giants, especially without Neighbors. I think Neighbors keeps them in contention for any game, not necessarily puts them over the edge or makes them a great team. But without Neighbors, I just really don't see a way for Danny Dimes to move the ball efficiently. And Seattle has good options on defense. They have Mike McDaniel. Is it Mike McDaniel, right? Mike McDonald.
Mike McDonald. Yeah, I was like, Mike McDaniel's the head coach of the
Dolphins. Excuse me, he's on the Dolphins. No, Mike McDonald, defensive coordinator for the Ravens last year, so he's running a tight ship on defense here. I really just don't see the Giants moving the ball efficiently against Seattle. And I think after Kenneth Walker's big game last week, we're going to see a lot of Kenneth Walker in this matchup as well. So I'm staying away from JSN purely based on the fact that there's not going to be a lot of passing volume. For what it's worth, Drew Phillips, the Giants starting nickel corner, has been pretty consistent as well. in covering the slot. I don't think that's again, if it was supposed to be a close game, the Giants allowing the 12th least fantasy points to wide receivers and Drew Phillips being consistent nickel corner would not throw me off of starting JSN. It's just purely the fact that it's going to be a blowout game, and I don't think JSN is going to get the work that we need. So,
yeah, it's a potential game script thing. And then also, I think it's a credit to Ken Walker. I love Ken Walker. Every year I go into fantasy drafts and I'm like, this guy's a top 5 running back in the NFL. If he's healthy, like, he's there. And every year, like a lot of fantasy people is like, well, he doesn't put up the numbers. Blah, blah, blah. Like, shut up, dude. Like, have you seen this guy run? Did you see that play against Detroit? He went this way and then complete 90 degrees that way and then turned the corner and scored a touchdown and then ran through a guy's face. Like, stop. Like, the guy is insanely talented. He's going to run all over the Giants this weekend. And yeah, I don't think the Giants passing defense is good. I do think it's game script, and I do think it'll be a negative game script for Seattle pass catchers. I feel like DK might catch like one big one early game, and then I think the rest of the game is going to be keep it on the ground and get to next week.
Yeah, I agree. And that brings up a good point too about the points allowed by defenses and having to kind of take that with a grain of salt. I just put out my rest of season rankings for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and I had Kyler Murray in the top 5. And one of the comments were saying that, oh, Kyler Murray has the toughest quarterback schedule for the rest of the season. It's like, all right, dude, you gotta take that with a grain of salt. Like, I don't. It's really hard to take away a finite, like a concrete.
It's a small sample size.
It's a small sample size, and at the same time, too, like I was able to say that about Washington because based on what we've seen,
Washington only allowed 14 points to Arizona last week. They only allowed that one early touchdown to Marvin Harrison. True. Like, maybe they're getting better.
Maybe, and that's the thing too. Defense has improved, so it's hard to really take away anything from this early. And unfortunately, it's not until the season's over where we could be like, wow, this team was actually kind of good against tight ends. I remember that one year where Arizona was abysmal against tight ends for some reason. Yeah. And I refused to believe it, but it was like every week, no matter who the tight end was, it was like 20 points. So yeah, there are special cases, but for the most part, you can't take away all too much.
I do love my matchups. Don't get me wrong. I do try to like lean on like talent at the end of the day. Like, I think a reason that I'm comfortable like betting against Washington is like I don't even know what his first name is, but that St. Juice guy, like Benjamin. Yeah. I don't care. Like, you could line up anybody against him. I'd be like, yeah, he's getting cooked. Like, I don't believe in the talent there. But then there's a defense like the Ravens where they had a couple of bad weeks. I'm not just like, oh, the Ravens are bad on defense this year. I even tweeted out before that Monday night game, like, all 4 of those teams, every single one of them had a like top 4 in the league pass defense statistics. I was like, damn, we could be in for some stinkers. And we got one stinker, and I think that was mostly due to bad quarterback play. And then the other game was like a damn near 40-point shootout. So like it matters a lot who you play against, and who's out on your defense. There's a lot of context that those stats don't capture.
100%. So yeah, that's my stance on JSN this week. Ian, who's your last player to round up this show?
All right. I like to end on like a boldish start, and I'm calling it bold-ish because you drafted this guy to be a starter, but he hasn't really played super well up until last week, but I really like Michael Pittman. I think that Joe Flacco filling in for even that little bit, I think it kind of opens something up. We saw them move the ball. We saw them get a win where their offense, produced in that short to mid-range throws. And I think there's some concerns about Anthony Richardson's accuracy. Mm-hmm. I do think he's just settling into the NFL offense again. He's like a very raw talent. Obviously,
7 games in.
Yep. Exactly. He's capable of making throws that like nobody on earth is. I don't think he's incapable of throwing a 14-yard dig route. I'm not going to let myself think that. If the guy can put a ball on the money 60 yards down the field while falling off his back foot, I think he'll figure out how to throw in the small, short to intermediate range. I'm not like super worried about like the long-term accuracy there. And I think that just from a scheme standpoint, the Colts saw how efficient it is to have a guy like Michael Pittman, who can win his ones and just keep the chains moving, which is what they did against the Steelers. They didn't blow them out, but they just kept the ball moving and kept the ball out of the Steelers' hands, and that's what ended up winning them the game at the end of the day. Pittman has already been getting the targets from Anthony Richardson. I just think they maybe are going to be a little less deep targets and a little more like consistent short to mid-range targets to keep those chains moving. And then Jacksonville, like here's where it really comes in, is Jacksonville has been bad. Jacksonville and the Rams have been like the two defenses that are just not good in like any statistical category. Jacksonville has allowed the third most receiving yards in the NFL, fourth in receiving touchdowns, and the second most plays of 20 plus yards allowed to receivers, which also tracks well if AR does decide to let one loose.
Yeah.
So it plays well with the quarterback style. I think that Pittman's going to be more consistent. I just think things start to gel this week, and the matchup isn't really going to stop it from happening. So fire up some Michael Pittman this week.
100%. I'm on board with that. I think, Pittman, I think he had over 100 yards last week.
Yeah.
And even before Anthony Richardson got hurt, he was starting to put that offense together in a tough matchup. So that's all good signs for Anthony Richardson and good signs for this offense. Maybe you can buy low on Michael Pittman after this week if he doesn't perform well, or if you see a high target share and you see a little bit of life, but it's still not exactly what we wanted from this offense. That'd be a great opportunity to buy low. So, because any signs of life as Anthony Richardson gets more comfortable in his role is good. So, all right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Reminder, check out Underdog. Use code ANALYST. They're going to match your first deposit up to $100 here. At the same time, make sure to follow Ian on Twitter, @IanGridley_FFA. He's got a lot of good tweets going on. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week.